Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So, day 5 of spoiler season is here, and so is Rocco. I'm not sure why I started singing, but I've done a lot of these episodes, so change it up, why not? Anyways, Rocco is an incredibly unique commander, one that can, well, make any creature kind of be your commander. So to see what I'm talking about, make sure you check that episode out. Also, wait, no! Okay, bad Vader impression, but yeah, to see why I'm saying no to widespread thievery, well, make sure you check that episode out. But not before you check this episode out where I say, do a barrel roll! Okay, a few things here. Number one, in the thumbnail, you might have noticed that barrel roll was right side up, and now it is upside down because I am very clever, right? Or not. Anyways, yes, and also I am very aware that the actual quote, do a barrel roll, is from Peppy Hare from Star Fox, not from Falco. But this commander's named Falco, and that's the first thing I thought of, and I wasn't about to do a Falco quote like, hey Einstein, I'm on your side. Because, yeah, I think that's a deeper cut. Regardless, Falco Spara Pactweaver has nothing to do with Star Fox, but it is a very exciting commander, so make sure you blame Eddie for all those terrible impressions, and then let's jump into it. So Falco, yeah, I'm just going to call this Falco, not Falco Spara, because it's Falco from Star Fox anyways, is a 3/3 bird demon with Flample that costs 1 green, white, blue. When Falco enters the battlefield, it's going to enter with a shield counter on it. And of course, a shield counter is a brand new thing from this set, which means if it would be dealt damage or destroyed, remove a shield counter from it instead. Falco also has, you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and on top of that, you may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to paying their other costs. So on its face, this seems like a pretty, straightforward commander. Awesome, all right, I'm gonna get counters on all my things, and then I can use those counters, to cast things off the top of my library. That's probably a good trade-off though, okay, even if I get some +1/+1 counters on some creatures, that might be worth actually just taking off, I'm gonna make that creature slightly smaller to cast things off the top of my library. Now, yeah, +1/+1 counters is definitely a direction that you can take this commander, or, other kinds of counters like, shield counters or keyword counters. Yeah, that's definitely one direction you can take it, and I'm not saying it's a bad direction, but, we're gonna use and abuse the ability to remove counters from our creatures in some pretty fun ways. Because there are certain kinds of mechanics that deal with counters on creatures that are meant to be a downside. So instead of that actually being a downside, we're actually gonna utilize that counter to help us cast spells off the top of our library. And then guess what? That is all upside because, well, now that creature doesn't have that counter on it, so the downside is gone. And actually, with working with ways to really use and abuse those kinds of abilities, you can make this into a very powerful commander, and your opponents have to be very wary when they see certain kinds of creatures coming out. Now, before we jump into those kinds of creatures and those kinds of cards, I do want to mention that the cards that I'm mentioning in this episode, and actually I think a couple of other ones, and you'll see why I'm not mentioning every single one of the creatures that deal with these mechanics, because there's a lot of them. Regardless, there's going to be a list of the cards in the description below, because, yeah, many of you out there have asked, hey, with these Commander Quick Takes, do you mind just making a list of the cards? Yep, there you go. Easy list for you in the description below, and yeah. Like I've said before, sometimes players like to pick up these cards sooner rather than later, because when players are excited about a commander, well, some cards typically, go up in demand. That being said now, let's jump into the cards. So yes, one of those mechanics that immediately came to my mind when I saw this commander was the Undying mechanic, or Undying keyword, whatever you want to call it. Young Wolf is a 1/1 wolf for a green mana, a very, very simple creature, but one that is incredibly impactful in this deck because it has Undying. So when this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, you return to the battlefield under its owner's control with one of those counters on it. So again, normally what would happen is, okay, alright, my Young Wolf died, it came back and got slightly larger. Awesome! Oh no, it died again, and now it's gone because it had a counter on it, so, Undying isn't gonna let it come back again. But with this command, you're like, oh, okay, Young Wolf died. Great, I get a counter on it, and, what's on top of my library? Oh, cool, I want to cast that. Let's take that +1/+1 counter off my Young Wolf, and then cast that card off the top of my library. Now, obviously, again, I should mention that you have to pay the cost, of course, for that card as well that you are casting, but yeah, as long as you can do that, goodbye counter from the Young Wolf. Which means that when it dies again, well, it's going to come back with another counter for you to take off again, and you see where this is going. This commander works in fantastic synergy with Undying, and also another mechanic we're going to get to here in a bit, because, yeah, it just lets you keep doing it over and over again, and it can make these kinds of creatures really hard for your opponents to ever get rid of, and actually there are going to be times where you actually want to sacrifice these creatures on your own to actually get the counter on them so you can use that counter, again, to cast things off the top. So yeah, even a card like Stormbound Geist can be very impactful in this deck. It's a 2/2 flyer that can only block creatures with flying, but again, it does have Undying, so extra value here. And speaking of extra value, well, how about Drolf's Mind Crusher, which has, well, Undying, of course, and when it enters the battlefield, target player puts the top 5 cards of their library into their graveyard. So if you do have some graveyard synergies with this deck, maybe you've got some ways to get cards back, maybe you've got some regrowth effects, that's great, cool. You can mill yourself, and if not, maybe mill an opponent, as long as they don't, care about their graveyard. Because if you're playing against like a Reanimator deck or a graveyard-centric deck, don't do that. Do not fuel them, okay? Next up, though, a card that is absolutely fantastic in this deck is River Kelpie. Now, River Kelpie is a 3/3 that has persist, which is kind of the exact opposite in a way of Undying. It says when this creature dies, it had no -1/-1 counters on it. Return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. So, basically Undying, but just with -1/-1 counters instead of +1/+1 counters. On top of that, River Kelpie says whenever it or another permanent enters the battlefield from a graveyard, draw a card. And on top of that, whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card. So obviously that second one can actually be pretty impactful if your opponents are casting a bunch of things out of their graveyards, like, things with flashback, and obviously this counts you as well. But that first part is obviously going to be incredible when you can just keep getting your Undying and persist creatures back again and again and again, and when you do so, you draw cards. And then another way to generate a lot of value is with Twilight Shepherd, which is a 5/5 with flying, vigilance, and of course persist, and it says, when it enters the battlefield, return to your hand all cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So as long as you can control that -1/-1 counter on this creature and keep removing it, well, you can just keep getting things back again and again and again. And of course, a massive effect that can be incredibly brutal to your opponents is with Woodfall Primus. Now this is an 8-mana creature, but it is well worth it when you can get it going, a 6/6 with trample and persist. And of course, when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent. So once you're set up, this can be a fantastic repeatable way to just destroy your opponent's non-creature permanents, and yeah, have fun with that. Now, speaking of fun, one artifact that I really want to highlight for this deck is Cauldron of Souls. It has tap, choose any number of target creatures. Each of those creatures gains persist until end of turn. This is just a fantastic card with this deck, and it just works in perfect tandem with your commander, and of course with your Undying creatures too. By giving all of your creatures persist, or I should say any number of creatures persist, you can just keep getting them back again and again and again, because again, your commander can help you remove those counters. And of course, by simply giving this to your creatures that have Undying and might already have that +1/+1 counter on them, well, you're going to get them back. Not because they have Undying, but because they have persist now, so it kind of can switch back and forth, which can be a lot of fun for you, and probably not for your opponents. And speaking of fun, this, of course, is not the first time this spoiler season that I have highlighted Devoted Druid. This card is, well, broken with a lot of things, and it can be incredibly impactful with this commander. It has tap, add green, and by putting a -1/-1 counter on it, you can untap Devoted Druid. So, you see where this is going. Basically, Devoted Druid is always going to be able to tap for a green to help you cast the top card of your library. Mana restrictions, apply, obviously, if it's just a card that just costs, a single blue mana. yeah, it can't do that, but you know what I mean. You tap and add a green. Cool, you put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid. Then you remove that counter because your commander's like, hey, you want to cast that top card of your library? And you're like, yes, I do. So then you can tap Devoted Druid again, and you see where this is going. Devoted Druid can essentially always help you generate mana for the top card of your library, and yeah, that just is a lot of mana that you can generate throughout the game with this. And of course, you know, if you want to include some combo cards with it, there are plenty of combo cards that you can include that can make this pretty broken. I mean, you're already including Undying and Persist, and there are ways to use and abuse those that also kind of works with Devoted Druid too, so have fun! Regardless, another card that is somewhat similar to Devoted Druid, but not anywhere near as powerful in a lot of situations, is Barrington Medic. Barrington Medic can tap to prevent the next 1 damage to be dealt to our creature or player this turn, and by putting a -1/-1 counter on it, you untap it. So like Devoted Druid, this could essentially just be a somewhat endless supply of counters that you can remove for your commander's ability to, you know, cast the top card of your library. And actually, okay, now I'm thinking about it, some cards that I should have included in this episode, and my apologies, are cards that actually can mess with the top card of your library, so make sure you know, look up cards like, you know, Ghoulcaller's Bell, or those kind of cards that can actually remove the top card of your library from the game, or put it in your graveyard, or on the bottom of your library. Just ways to manipulate the top of your library to make sure that you can actually cast spells off the top that you want to cast. But now with that said, some other types of cards that you definitely want to consider if you're going for that kind of Undying Persist strategy are cards that are free sacrifice outlets, and there are some fantastic ones in these colors like Fanatical Devotion and Greater Good. Fanatical Devotion says sacrifice a creature, regenerate target creature. So first up, this can just be a great way to protect a key creature like, you know, your commander, and also, you know, even if you don't need to protect your commander, it can just be a great free sacrifice outlet, which again, you can use and abuse with your Undying and Persist creatures to get counters on them when you need to. And then Greater Good says sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power, then discard 3 cards. So with this, obviously the larger power of the creature you're sacrificing, the more cards you are drawing, and yeah, once you're set up properly, you can really churn through your deck pretty quickly. Speaking of which, another enchantment that might really help you out, I mean, help your opponents a little bit, but you more so, is Fecundity. It says whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. So again, once you're set up with an outlet and, you know, your commander and, you know, one of those Undying or Persist creatures, have fun just drawing a ton of cards. Now, some other kinds of cards that you might want to consider are cards like Vega the Watcher and Sage of the Beyond. Vega can also draw you a ton of cards with this commander. It says whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. So yeah, casting a spell at the top of your library is definitely not your hand, so cool! Draw a card every single time you do so. And then Sage of the Beyond can help in a different way. It says, spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. So this can save you a ton of mana throughout the game. Again, by getting this into play, every single spell at the top of your library now is 2 cheaper to cast, and yeah, you can really churn through those spells pretty quickly. Now again, depending on the direction that you want to go with this commander, you also might want to consider Proliferate cards. So again, if you're, you know, utilizing +1/+1 counters heavily, you know, without Undying, and, you know, you're utilizing a lot of shield counters and other positive kind of counters, cool! Things like Thrumming Bird, Flux Channeler, and Evolution Sage can really help you out. Thrumming Bird says, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate, and of course it's got flying, so it can get through pretty easily on at least one opponent. And of course, proliferating means you choose any number of permanents and or players with counters on them, then give each another counter of a kind already there. So again, if you've got a bunch of beneficial counters out there, you know, on your creatures, like +1/+1 counters, cool, you get extra counters on your creatures, and now that's more opportunities to remove those counters to actually, you know, cast things off the top of your library. And then, of course, Flux Channeler and Evolution Sage can do this in an even bigger way. Flux Channeler says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. So yeah, that can happen quite often. And of course, since you are in green, well, obviously with Evolution Sage, it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So yeah, now go ramp, play your land for turn, any kind of a landfall trigger you've got, Evolving Wilds, whatever it is, proliferate, proliferate, proliferate. And speaking of proliferating, well, one commander that might want to utilize Falco in the 99 of its deck is Atraxa Praetor's Voice. Now, I will say it really, again, depends upon the build and what you want to do with that deck, but yeah, Atraxa has, at the beginning of your end step, Proliferate. So again, an Atraxa deck that might be built around proliferating with a lot of +1/+1 counters really can just get a ton of counters out there very quickly, so you can utilize those counters, again, to cast things off the top of your library thanks to Falco. And also, of course, keep in mind that Falco is going to be very protective with this kind of a deck, because when you are proliferating, you can, of course, give Falco another shield counter if it's already got one on it, or if it kept the one on it, I should say. And yeah, once you build up a ton of shield counters, it can be very tough to take out Falco. You know, I guess outside of exiling and bounce effects. You know what I mean. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Falco. Not Falco Spara Pactweaver, just Falco. Hey Einstein, I'm on your side. Okay, no, I still like do a barrel roll better, even though I know Falco didn't say that, okay? Also, did you know that if you type do a barrel roll into Google and you hit enter, it actually, the screen does a barrel roll. It's kind of funny. Anyways, all of that aside though, yeah, I think a lot of players out there are going to be really excited for this commander. There's a lot of different directions that you can take it. Some players might go, all positive kind of counters like ++1 counters or shield counters or keyword counters and maybe some proliferate effects in there. And, other players like me might go, hey, Undying, persist, let's use and abuse those mechanics. Regardless, yeah, it's a really exciting commander, and there have been a lot of other exciting commanders and other exciting cards in this spoiler season, so make sure you check out my other quick takes. And yeah, I'm sure there are going to be even more exciting cards coming out in the near future, so make sure you stay tuned for even more quick takes on this channel. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.